entrada Sea to Sky, na Colômbia Britânica. Dos arredores da cidade de Vancouver, aos picos nevados de Whistler e além. Um paraíso para esportes radicais.
Whitewater kayaking, bungee jumping, heli-skiing.
Um legado da riqueza de recursos naturais.
Some of the earliest towns in British Columbia are there because of mining.
E a rede de transporte que criou a base para o Canadá atual.
If it weren't for the railway, it's debatable whether British Columbia would have joined Canada or not.
Vamos explorar a costa como nunca e desvendar os segredos do passado, presente e futuro marítimos. Este é o Canadá visto de cima. Ao seguir o litoral do sul da Colômbia Britânica na direção noroeste, o incrível contorno de Vancouver. A cidade fica na península de Burrard. Tem 40 quilômetros de extensão e é quase toda cercada pela enseada de Burrard, pelo rio Fraser e pelo Estreito de Geórgia. A geografia da cidade é singular, pois ela fica aninhada entre as montanhas e o mar. É uma das cidades mais bonitas do mundo. A região que cerca Vancouver é a entrada para uma linda viagem costeira. Ao atravessar o mar aberto, o farol de Point Atkinson, em West Vancouver, marca a entrada da enseada de Burrard. É um importante corredor marítimo para navios de carga de todo o mundo. O farol centenário é considerado um sítio histórico nacional. Após Point Atkinson, vemos a Ilha Passage, uma formação rochosa de 13 hectares. Ela marca a entrada para outra via marítima, o estuário de Howe. O estuário de Howe é uma massa de água vasta que se estende por 45 quilômetros em meio ao continente. É o fiord mais ao sul da América do Norte. E marca a divisão geográfica entre o sul continental da Colômbia Britânica e a Sunshine Coast. A região era habitada pelos povos Squamish e Sichelt milhares de anos atrás. Os espanhóis chegaram aqui em 1791. Um ano depois, foi a vez do capitão inglês George Vancouver. Hoje, a região é muito pouco povoada. As margens do fiord se erguem. São enormes paredões de rocha que surgem do mar. O estuário de Hull também tem margens rochosas e acidentadas. As águas protegidas são muito frequentadas por barcos amadores que gostam de zigue-zaguear pelas ilhas espetaculares que pontuam a região. A costa do estuário de Hull é uma maravilha natural. Ao seguir para o norte, as cidades começam a desaparecer lentamente e são substituídas por trechos longos de faixas litorâneas não povoadas. Esta é uma das principais atrações da Colômbia Britânica, a rodovia Sea to Sky. Ela percorre a margem esquerda do estuário de Hull, traçando o contorno desta enseada protegida. A rodovia é conhecida como uma das mais bonitas do mundo. Começando na fronteira com os Estados Unidos, a rodovia se estende por mais de 400 quilômetros. E formam uma trilha incrível por 5 zonas biogeoclimáticas diferentes. A rodovia também traça 2 rotas históricas: a Pemberton Trail e a Trilha da Corrida do Ouro. Estas rotas históricas ajudavam a levar o povo Salish, morador da costa, ao Fraser Canyon, no interior, e os mineradores às minas de Caribou em meados do século XIX. O legado dos recursos naturais foi mantido no século XX. Na cidade de Britannia Beach, um século atrás, minas de cobre foram descobertas aqui, determinando o futuro da região.
Britannia Mine is located on the beautiful coast of Howe Sound, which is 50 kilometers north of Vancouver, British Columbia. It is surrounded by stunning, beautiful mountains, and I think the combination of ocean and mountains just makes Britannia Beach the reason why people wanted to live here 70 years, 100 years ago, and still today.
O Museu de Mineração de Britannia pode ser visto a quilômetros daqui. É um símbolo da cidade e da região.
Some of the earliest towns in British Columbia are there because of mining. And so in the context of Canada, mining in British Columbia are some of the first earliest mines in Canada and some of the greatest mines. Britannia Beach is one of the earliest mines in BC. It was started in 1904, and over its 70 years of operation, more than 60,000 people lived and worked here. We had something like 30 different nationalities that worked here in Britannia.
Antes de 1956, só era possível chegar de barco a Britannia Beach. A cidade era totalmente isolada. Mas era muito animada. Tinha bibliotecas, quadras de tênis e piscinas. Além de festas e atividades sociais frequentes. Uma bênção para os trabalhadores que passavam a maior parte da vida embaixo da terra.
It's recognized today as a National Historic Site because over that period of time, people did build province and country. They went to work because there was real purpose behind what they were doing. They were getting minerals, and those minerals were wanted and needed around the world to build many of the bridges and the infrastructures we now take for granted.
O museu tem 15 prédios históricos. Máquinas, outros equipamentos e exposições acima e embaixo da terra. Tudo isso era essencial para extrair minerais desta montanha.
Copper is usually found in a mineral, so it needs to be crushed and the minerals need to be extracted from the rock. So here at Britannia, it was an open pit mine in the early days, and then it had what's called an underground mining, so it had miles and kilometers of tunnels. When you go underground, it is a small tunnel. It's not a huge, big tunnel for modern equipment, but the smaller equipment that would have been used in 1930s style mining. We do have a train that runs through the tunnel. Here at the museum, of course, people can go back and see maybe what it would have been like to be a miner in the 1930s when hard rock mining was happening here. We're in the 1912 haulage tunnel, and it is indeed 100 years old. This tunnel was not used for mining, but for the shuttling back and forth of the equipment that was needed to feed mill number 1. The tunnel has a real sense of sound because you can hear the water dripping. It's always damp in the tunnel. And so you can well imagine a miner going to work, because this would have been exactly like mining tunnels would be elsewhere in Britannia. There's over 200 kilometers of mining tunnels in Britannia, so going on a train, going to work was part of their job every day.
A primeira leva de minérios foi expedida de Britannia em 1904. A mina cresceu rapidamente e em 1929 a cidade era a maior produtora de cobre do Império Britânico.
When you get your ore, of course, then you have to figure out how you crush it and then extract the minerals, separate the minerals from the rock. And the big mill building, that's what that building was all about. So you have the mining part, but you also have the milling here. There are larger buildings in the world today, but I can tell you that anytime you go into this building now, people feel the energy of this building and its 100-year history.
A moenda tem 20 andares de altura e cobre o enorme paredão de rocha. Os 6 andares do topo da estrutura, parecida com uma catedral, eram ocupados por moendas que esmagavam as pedras até transformá-las em pó. À medida que o pó descia pela estrutura, água, ar e produtos químicos eram adicionados à mistura, num processo conhecido como flotação. Através desse processo, o minério valioso era separado do resto das rochas. Assim, quando chegava ao térreo, os trabalhadores podiam recolher o mineral.
At that point, on these big platforms were large tanks, and it allowed through chemicals to trick the minerals to float to the top so they could be skimmed off. That's what was sent to the smelter. The rest was waste rock. So this building was about rocking and rolling with crushing of rock, and it was dusty and noisy. There is a saying that says, if you can't grow it, you must mine it. And it is an absolutely true statement if you take some time to think about it. So modern mining gives us all the things we want in our society. So for a person today, we believe we need to understand mining. Mining in British Columbia remains important to British Columbians and Canadians because we're part of a global world where we do get from the ground the minerals we need for our everyday life. Mining matters to people, and it's a job for us to say it's not just something dirty that I don't need to care about. You need to care about it, and our job here at the Britannia Mining Museum is to help you with that awareness in its past, in its present, and what does it mean to us in the future.
Além das fronteiras de Britannia Beach, as rochas e penhascos se erguem no Parque Provincial de Stawamus Chief. O parque é formado pela área que cerca penhascos de granito com 700 metros de altura. O nome do parque é uma homenagem a Stawamus, um vilarejo de um povo nativo. O pico mais alto do parque, conhecido como Chefe, é famoso entre alpinistas de todo o mundo. Ele é considerado por muitos o segundo maior monólito de granito do mundo. Após o Parque Provincial, vemos o limite norte do incrível estuário de Howe. Esta é a cidade de Squamish. Ela tem o nome do povo indígena que habitou esta região por milhares de anos. A comunidade moderna foi fundada no início do século XX, quando Squamish se tornou o primeiro terminal norte da Pacific Great Eastern Railway. Ela faz parte de um legado ferroviário que ajudou a estabelecer as bases para o Canadá de hoje. Um século depois, esse legado ainda está preservado no parque da Associação do West Coast Railway.
We're on the Pacific coast of Canada at a town called Squamish, British Columbia. The West Coast Railway Association was founded in 1961. It was the era when steam was ending and diesel was coming into its own. We had a lot of pieces of rolling stock, but we weren't able to preserve them properly. We weren't able to exhibit them. We weren't able to interpret them. We really did need a home. We acquired this piece of property in Squamish in 1990, and we've been building ever since.
O parque abriga dezenas de vagões históricos restaurados, construídos a partir de 1890. É um dos poucos museus deste tipo no Canadá.
This is Railway Post Office Car 3704. It ran the route between Calgary and Vancouver for many years, right into the 1970s. It's how the mail came to town in the early days of Canada, right up until recent times. You can see here the various bags of mail into which the postal workers would sort the mail. As they approached a station, town, or a community, you'll see that the bags are all identified with the station names, and they would open the door, toss the bag out, that would be the mail in, and grab the bag you saw off the post outside and bring it in and continue sorting. While the car was moving down the tracks, there'd be up to 5 posties aboard here working, or railway post office clerks working to sort the mail, and they would sort the letters, they would sort the parcels, and make sure that everybody got their mail on time in the various towns along the line. It's a key part of the story on how communication started in Canada.
Além dos vagões históricos, o parque inclui uma construção recente, uma rotunda enorme e moderna.
It was interesting building a roundhouse because there hadn't been one built in Canada in decades. Included with the project was the installation of a turntable, which is required to turn the locomotive so they can access the tracks into the crescent-shaped building. And it was opened in 2011 as our newest exhibit hall.
A rotunda abriga alguns dos vagões mais valiosos da associação. Inclusive, o primeiro comprado por ela. O vagão executivo número 16 da companhia Canadian Pacific, chamado de British Columbia ou Colômbia Britânica.
And this is where it all began for us. Wood cars like this, built way back in 1890, had been outlawed to operate on Canadian railways. Most of them were destroyed. The refinishing of all of this wonderful mahogany was quite a task in and of itself. When the car was taken apart, we discovered there were over 100,000 pieces of wood in the car. Some of them very, very tiny, others some of the major pieces you see. Each one had to be stripped right down to the wood, refinished and revarnished. The car was then reassembled and 12 coats of varnish were put on to create the finish you see today.
Outra joia da coleção é uma enorme locomotiva a vapor, a Royal Hudson.
The Royal Hudson really is the jewel of our collection. It's a very significant piece in the history of Canada. It's very rare in that it still operates. There's only two, maybe three mainline steam engines left in Canada that can operate. It was restored over a long period of time, and it demonstrates clearly an era that just isn't available for people to see. It would typically pull 10 to 15 car passenger trains or 40 and 50 car freight trains single-handedly. It's equivalent basically to probably two of the diesels of the same era together in terms of its pulling power. A magnificent sight when it's steaming along the main line. Today, our 12-acre Heritage Park site is a year-round, open everyday tourist attraction where we tell the story, and our collection has grown to 95 locomotives and cars. 15 of them operate, the other 80 are for exhibit purposes. Well, what we're building here is a completely interpretive community that would have been typical of those established in Western Canada because the railway came. Unlike other parts of the world, the railway actually created our communities in many cases out here, as opposed to just connecting existing communities in other parts of the world. If it weren't for the railway, it's debatable whether British Columbia would have joined Canada or not. So if you think about the Pacific coast, the ocean, of course, is north-south. And all of the trade routes were north-south. San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Victoria were the trade routes up and down the coast. As the British were looking at what to do with this territory on the west coast, they had to decide how, in fact, it might be connected to Canada. And after the Confederation of Canada was created, the idea of building a railway from the east to the west to connect the country was floated. That was enough to get British Columbia interested, and the rest is history.
Pouco depois de Squamish, as águas serenas do estuário de Howe ficam para trás e a paisagem se ergue. Adornada com rios e montanhas incríveis, a região é um ponto de encontro para a cultura e a aventura. A cidade de Squamish e seus arredores são conhecidos como a capital recreativa do Canadá. Aqui, podemos praticar tanto atividades tradicionais quanto novas aventuras ao ar livre que aproveitam as singularidades naturais da região.
Well, anybody that's looking for extreme activity has many choices, from riverboarding to whitewater kayaking to bungee jumping to heli skiing to really anything that they want to do. BC is a great playground to do it.
Amante da natureza, Sky MacLeod vem explorando as águas costeiras da Colômbia Britânica há anos. Agora, ele promove um esporte que acredita ser novo e exclusivo da região.
Well, I riverboard, and for a lot of people, they don't know what it is, but it's riding a boogie board or a bodyboard down whitewater, down the rivers. Well, when I was living abroad for a lot of years, I saw a few guys doing it. I was totally blown away, and I've stuck with it ever since. Brought it back to Vancouver, and I've been trying to introduce it here. Like a kayaker goes down the whitewater, I go down on my chest, on my stomach, but with a boogie board, and surf the waves and ride the whitewater. Well, there are small, important details that you have to know to control the board, to turn, how to duck dive with the board. A lot of similarities when you're bodyboarding waves in the ocean. You have to know how to use your fins. You have to be able to turn on a dime immediately. You have to be able to move your whole lower body sometimes in a split second. It It's hard for me to tell actually how fast I'm going in the river, but I'm going as fast as the river, and she's really moving. You can just look at the river, see how fast it's going, and then you know how fast I'm going. Where we run, it's all canyons surrounded by sheer cliff walls. So in some places it's very steep and very narrow, and there are some flat water places where you can just float along. And when you're looking up at the canyon walls, everything is very quiet. You see eagles flying down, sometimes eating salmon on the rock. You see salmon jumping sometimes. It's just totally tranquil. So when people see me jumping in, their first reaction is, what's he doing? But when they see me riding the whitewater, and then when I'm out and I'm coming back to do another run, they talk to me and ask me what's going on. I tell them, and they're very intrigued. And a lot of them want to try it, so that's a great thing.
O litoral da Colômbia Britânica é uma maravilha natural, salientada pelas montanhas costeiras íngremes. Este é o Parque Provincial de Garibaldi, localizado no continente a leste da rodovia Sea to Sky. O parque fica a apenas 70 quilômetros ao norte de Vancouver, mas parece outro mundo. O parque foi criado em 1927 e ganhou o nome do patriota italiano do século XIX, Giuseppe Garibaldi. Ele engloba quase 2.000 quilômetros quadrados de beleza acidentada. É uma paisagem diversa, com florestas de enormes abetos de Douglas, cedros vermelhos e tsugas. A paisagem é formada por uma mistura de montanhas, vales, lagos e rios alimentados por geleiras e incríveis vistas. O parque é um paraíso para amantes do ar livre. E contém mais de 90 quilômetros de trilhas para caminhada, que podem ser incluídas entre as mais bonitas do mundo. No coração do Parque Provincial de Garibaldi, vemos o Monte Garibaldi. Com mais de 2.600 metros de altitude, ele é um dos picos mais espetaculares e famosos da costa oeste do Canadá. O Monte Garibaldi também é um vulcão. Conhecido como estratovulcão, ele tem a forma de um cone e foi esculpido durante anos por várias camadas de lava endurecida. A primeira erupção do Monte Garibaldi aconteceu há 250 mil anos. Hoje, o estratovulcão é considerado potencialmente ativo. É um vulcão formado junto a uma geleira. Isso faz do Monte Garibaldi o único vulcão deste tipo na América do Norte e o maior do sudoeste da Colômbia Britânica. O vulcão também tem campos de gelo incríveis. Com 35 quilômetros quadrados, eles são mantidos por mais de 5 metros de precipitação de neve todos os anos. Ao norte, o Lago Garibaldi irradia uma beleza incrível. Alimentado por geleiras a leste e a sul, o lago tem cor azul turquesa devido às minúsculas partículas de rocha que se espalham por ele e são resultado da erosão glacial. Ao norte, a linda montanha Black Tusk é um marco. Com mais de 2.300 metros de altitude, o pico pode ser visto de qualquer lugar do parque. Na língua Squamish, o Black Tusk é conhecido como local de pouso do pássaro trovão, em homenagem ao lendário pássaro que cuidava do povo Squamish. Os indígenas dizem que a cor e a forma do Black Tusk são resultado do pouso do pássaro trovão. Hoje, ele é um enorme desafio para aqueles que o aceitam. A recompensa é uma vista de tirar o fôlego. A estrada Sea to Sky, na Colômbia Britânica, percorre uma incrível subida. De rochas e penhascos irregulares ao topo das montanhas de Whistler e Blackcomb. Ambas têm mais de 2.000 metros de altitude e ficam perto dos limites do Parque Provincial de Garibaldi. A Whistler Blackcomb é considerada uma das melhores estações de esqui do mundo. São duas montanhas diferentes ligadas por um bondinho. São 4,4 km de uma aventura em grande altitude. Abaixo da montanha, o vilarejo de Whistler tem cerca de 10.000 habitantes, mas recebe mais de 2 milhões de visitantes todos os anos. E as pessoas não procuram apenas o esqui. Na baixa temporada, a região está rapidamente se tornando conhecida como uma das melhores do mundo para a prática do mountain bike.
Whistler is just an hour and a half north of Vancouver, and I think we're really known as one of the world's most popular ski resorts. But in the summer, Whistler really is a special place as well. We wrap up skiing down here in the valley, and we start before the snow melts. We start actually peeling the snow off the trails with some of our machines to open up the mountain biking. Our mountain biking starts here on the Victoria Day long weekend, so third weekend in May. And at the same time, we're actually still skiing at that time through well into June. So that transition is basically skiing fades out and mountain biking fades in. We have the biggest vertical rise in North America, both skiing and mountain biking. So people are able to ride their bikes for 5,000 vertical feet, all lift accessed. And then I think one of the things that is really an advantage for us that some people think is a disadvantage is the kind of weather that we get here. So, I think people think that we end up getting quite a bit of precipitation here, and to some extent that's true. But what results from that is great snow, great skiing conditions, and from a riding standpoint, that provides us with some of the best conditions for riding in. So it keeps our dirt, the surfaces that people ride on, really smooth and grippy, really just the ideal riding conditions. So kind of a combination of the natural amenities of the mountain and the weather that we get here is really ideal for mountain biking. Mountain biking's been happening here for quite a while. We've been running the Lift Access Mountain Bike Park here since 1999, so we're into our 14th year now. And just the whole mountain biking scene here continues to develop and continues to grow.
O sistema de teleféricos que carrega esquiadores na maior parte do ano leva os ciclistas e suas bicicletas até o pico da montanha. Daqui, eles começam a descida por quilômetros de trilhas áridas e acidentadas.
Really, when you think about free-ride mountain biking, it actually really started, here on the West Coast, really based on the North Shore of Vancouver, and eventually found its way migrating up towards where we are here in Whistler. And really in the whole corridor, all the way from Squamish all the way up to Pemberton, probably have some of the most popular and probably the greatest density of really good mountain biking anywhere in the world. There's a whole range of skill levels. Our beginner trails are, we kind of keep them between 6 and 8% grade, so they're really, really flat. In fact, flatter than you could probably even move on skis. Whereas, for our steeper stuff, you're probably getting up into the 30+% range. And again, you got that whole range that really allows us to provide experiences for the whole gamut, from somebody that's just trying it for the first time right up to some of the best riders in the world. So we're just over 5,000 feet of vertical, but because our base area is so low, our top elevation compared to a lot of mountain resorts is actually quite low, which is a good thing because, you're not really affected by altitude. So the top of our mountain's just over 7,000 feet. About 2,300 meters, and from there we've just opened up a new trail, a new single-track trail called Top of the World, and it starts above the tree line, so all in alpine setting. Spectacular views, spectacular trail, and eventually winds its way down, almost 10 kilometers down to the valley, 5,000 feet below. Some of our more famous trails are machine-built trails that have, berms and, lots of jumps on them and that sort of thing. And just that feeling of just kind of letting the bike go and kind of flowing with the terrain and, hitting the jumps, catching some air is one of those good feelings for sure. So we'll get people from, obviously from the rest of Canada, from all over the U.S., tons of people from Europe, particularly UK, quite a few from Germany. But then we're getting pockets of people really from every continent on the globe. So it's pretty exciting to see all the people from around the world that come here to gather and have some fun on the mountain.
Dos arredores da mundialmente famosa cidade de Vancouver, a capital canadense da aventura, Squamish e seus arredores. E aos picos altos e geleiras vulcânicas do Parque Provincial de Garibaldi, a estrada Sea to Sky, na Colômbia Britânica, é uma jornada costeira impressionante, tanto pelo chão quanto pelo ar. É um litoral cheio de cultura e história, onde enseadas protegidas encontram montanhas enormes e formam uma paisagem inacreditável. Aqui, nos limites do Canadá.